We all walk into different seasons of life, carrying heavy burdens. You might be facing a sudden crisis in your finances, chronic anxiety at your workplace, or a relationship that feels like it's unraveling. When these challenges hit, our natural human instinct is to study them. We talk about the problem with anyone who will listen, we dwell on it right before we go to sleep, and it's the very first thing we think about when we wake up. We do this because we think we're trying to solve the issue. But by fixating on every detail, we aren't actually finding solutions. We are only magnifying the problem. Eventually, the problem expands until it dominates your vision, standing like a giant in the middle of your path. Meanwhile, your perception of God has been squeezed into something that looks small, distant, and ineffective. Once the problem looks that massive, we panic. We exhaust ourselves trying to fight these newly magnified enemies using our own human strength, leaning heavily on control, manipulation, and endless worry. Fighting an obstacle that we have mentally blown out of proportion using only our own strength leads to exactly one outcome: complete exhaustion and continuous defeat. The psalmist offers a different approach in Psalm 68:1, writing, "Let God arise and his enemies be scattered." Notice what the text does not say. It does not instruct you to figure out how to fight every single enemy yourself, or to study your obstacles until you master them. This requires a shift in perspective. We have to stop staring at the sheer size of the mountain in front of us and stop burning all our energy trying to shrink our massive problems down to a manageable size. The counter strategy, as outlined in Isaiah 40, is to deliberately scale up our view of God. We have to look up and acknowledge him as the creator who spoke galaxies into existence. When you acknowledge his sovereignty, your reality shifts. The problem remains the same size, but God becomes so massive the obstacle pales in comparison. Nothing catches him by surprise. He isn't pacing heaven wondering how to rescue you. He already has the victory mapped out. As the scale of the creator replaces the scale of the problem, the responsibility for the outcome changes hands. True peace and victory begin the exact moment you stop trying to control the situation and hand the steering wheel back to a God who is infinitely larger than the obstacle. We see this in the historical account of King Jehoshaphat. He was facing impossible odds as an overwhelming enemy army marched toward his borders, but he received a revelation that shifted the mechanics of the war. Do not be afraid nor dismayed because of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's. To apply that today, we have to lay down the armor of self-reliance. We have to strip off the habits of manipulation, tight control, and endless worry. This means dealing with the friction of trusting God's timing. While you wait for a breakthrough, he is working behind the scenes, softening hearts and closing the wrong doors to prepare the way. The book of Ephesians reminds us that our struggle is not against flesh and blood. Because the victory is already completely secured, your only job is to simply stand firm and watch God work. Knowing that God is fighting on our behalf changes how we live. Faith is the active posture you take every morning, the clothes you put on before you ever step foot outside your front door. This begins with the words you choose. You stop speaking declarations of defeat over your life and instead start focalizing God's magnitude over your circumstances. This was the strategy when Jehoshaphat's army marched out to face that overwhelming enemy. They didn't put the warriors on the front lines. They sent the choir first, singing praises before a single sword was drawn. Praising God before the victory is even visible sends a signal to the enemy. You already know exactly how the story ends. The final physical manifestation of this faith is walking with your head held high. You move with a quiet, confident assurance, refusing to drag your feet in defeat. When you intentionally make God bigger, surrender your need for control, and walk in stubborn faith, your massive enemies, the fear, the doubt, and the impossible circumstances, have no choice but to scatter.